In April 1912, the greatest steamship of her time, the Titanic, struck an iceberg. 4 hours later, with a loss of over 1,500 lives, she sank 2.5 miles down to the bottom of the Atlantic. The subject of disaster movies, the ship they said could never sink, pride of the White Star Line, left Liverpool on her maiden voyage. 6 days out, she was lost beyond reach. Today, the Titanic has been found, rediscovered by a team of scientists from America who reached the broken wreckage of one of the most elusive and famous 20th century shipwrecks in the world. With modern technology, man can reach almost any part of the ocean floor and almost any wreck. What should be done with them? Especially the iron and steel wrecks of the 20th century, both war and civilian. Salvage them for scrap, save them as historical evidence, or just leave them where they are. There are few solutions, none of them simple, all of them controversial.
Achtung! Torpedoschuss! 9 Meter! Genau 9 Meter halten! Genau 9 Meter halten! Achtung! Achtung! Los!
3 years after the Titanic disaster, as this propaganda film shows, another great ship was hit by 2 torpedoes and sank in less than 1 hour. She was the Lusitania. Today, the Lusitania lies 300 feet down, 8 miles from the Irish coast. At the beginning of the First World War, the German government announced that any ship crossing the Atlantic bound for British ports would be open to attack. The international outcry at the loss of over 1,000 innocent lives was intense. The Germans claimed she was armed and carrying munitions, a claim denied by the British government. But the questions have remained unanswered. In 1979, a sophisticated diving operation was mounted to salvage any valuable materials and look for evidence of arms on board. The project highlights the conflict between salvage for scrap and preservation for the future. The ship, lying on her side, was strewn with debris, artifacts there for the taking, like the ship's bell.
Our thing's heading that way.
Drive away from the side of the ship.
In this type of operation, there's little or no money in historical research alone, but there is a fortune to be made in salvage, and salvage techniques can be ruthless, like this 6-foot-long tube of plastic explosives to be wrapped around the giant prop shaft.
You've got the charge secured, Roger. Okay, if you can just pan the camera around the charge so that we can see where it's connected.
22 tons of phosphor bronze, which melted down, will pay for the whole project. All wrecks lying in international waters are open to this kind of plunder. With the complications of ownership and salvage rights, the whole subject of the protection of wrecks is in dispute.
Oh, what a beautiful machine.
Tremendous, really nice.
Beautiful, mate. Bloody lovely.
But when the wreck is a military aircraft in United Kingdom waters, there must be official government permission to salvage. Discovered intact 250 feet below the surface of Loch Ness in Scotland, this plane from the Second World War is unique. Her call sign was R for Robert. She is the last remaining wartime Wellington bomber. Designed by the legendary Barnes Wallis, the Wellington was the fastest, the most advanced bomber of its time. In the early years of the war, Wellington suffered huge losses in daylight attacks over Germany. The life expectancy of a plane was only 7 raids. R for Robert was a veteran of over 14. It was on New Year's Eve 1940 that R for Robert flew through a snowstorm. One of her engines spluttered and stopped. The pilot spotted Loch Ness through a break in the clouds and took the chance to ditch. Although the tail has broken away, what remains weighs over 14 tons. The tires are still inflated and fuel pours from her tanks. Inside the frame are reminders of the plane's function, perfectly preserved and still lethal. Even the lights still work.
We found 4 aluminium sea markers. These are an aluminium and magnesium mixture which is liable to spontaneous ignition. These we have just destroyed.
The bomb disposal experts recovered over 5,000 rounds of live ammunition.
In fact, the ammunition, if you look at it, is in absolutely superb condition. It's totally unmarked, the links are still flexible, and we've done nothing to it, just taken it straight out of the tanks and put it here.
The crew had bailed out, and the Wellington will be preserved and restored. But if anyone had been lost inside, she would have been designated an official war grave, and no attempt made to raise her. The battleship HMS Royal Oak, one of Britain's biggest war graves. In 1939, a German U-boat crept through the nets guarding Scapa Flow off the north coast of Scotland, expecting to find the British fleet. She found only the Royal Oak. The ship went down with a loss of over 800 men.
We gather today to honor the memory of the 24 officers and 809 men who were lost when the battleship Royal Oak was sunk here in Scapa Flow on October the 13th, 1939. Let us worship God, let us hear the word of God. Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations, before the mountains were brought forth. Forever thou hast
Every year, the Royal Navy conducts a service of remembrance over the official war grave, whilst a diver prepares to raise the white ensign from the ship's stern, 50 feet down.
Destruction and sayest, return, ye children of men. For 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night. So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. Our Lord Jesus Christ said, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And he that liveth and believeth in me shall never die.
The once great ship will never be touched. The sea will gradually be allowed to take her, and perhaps in time with that will go the memory of her lost crew.
To begin your tour today, I would like to
But across the other side of the world, a similarly emotive war grave is being treated in a very different way.
It was built in 1961 and later dedicated to the men who lost their lives here on the entire island of Oahu on that tragic morning, December 7th, 1941.
The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, 7th of December 1941, took America completely by surprise. The event was so traumatic for the United States that it was reenacted and refilmed for propaganda purposes.
At Hickam Field, ground crews were at work. On a dock in Pearl Harbor, a few bluejackets idled away a few minutes. At Kaneohe, a field mass was being held. Out of the misty Pacific skies, like tiny locusts, they swarmed in from the sea.
The aircraft carriers the attacking planes wanted were out to sea, but on Battleship Row, there were targets for the taking. The raid was devastatingly effective. 17 ships sunk, disabled or beached. 350 planes damaged or destroyed. Afterwards, in the biggest salvage operation in history, all but 3 ships were reclaimed and eventually saw action against the Japanese. One ship that was never raised today lies where she sank. The USS Arizona, like Royal Oak, a national monument. A white war memorial now straddles the hulk, lying in 20 feet of water. The oil slick is fuel still escaping from the Arizona's hold.
Domestic objects are what is left of the ship's original superstructure. The large round object is the base for the number 3 gun turret. The tall object is what is left of the ship's aftermath. The flagpole is attached to this section of the ship and not to the memorial itself. Ladies and gentlemen, this does complete this portion of your tour. In just a few moments, we'll be landing at the memorial.
Here, 1 million people visit each year. Japanese rub shoulders with Americans in the chapel that commemorates the 1,177 sailors and Marines who died and still lie entombed inside the ship below. Americans want to preserve the Arizona, but submerged for over 40 years, she is in danger of collapse and rusting away. Specialist teams of divers are now surveying the hull to determine how much deterioration is taking place and what can be done to stop it.
We've got a ship that's been underwater for 45 years. We know that it's deteriorating. There's a corrosion process taking place, but beyond that, we know very little about it. And as a result of the work that's been done on this project, we're gathering baseline data relative to how much corrosion has occurred, what the rate of that corrosion is, what some of the significant factors are which are affecting that corrosion process, and what, if anything, we might be able to do to either slow it down or stop it.
Being real careful with placement of feet, fin movements, trying to keep your fins up away from the silt and staying out.
Dan Lenihan is coordinating the diving effort. One group is a diving and salvage unit from the U.S. Naval Reserve. The other is Lenihan's own team of archaeologists, illustrators and divers from the U.S. National Park Service.
Supervisor, you have 2 people on ready for that first dive.
Dan Lenihan, chief of the Submerged Cultural Resources Unit, is to work out how to stop a metal ship from rusting away in salt water. The Arizona is in fact a living artificial reef. The organisms that cover the ship reduce the water action, and the corrosion rate is lower than anyone expected.
It's important to realize that the questions that are being asked about Arizona have never really been asked about an historic vessel in a totally submerged environment. We know, for instance, that marine fouling is going to be one component of the answers to those questions. These marine organisms provide a shell or a scab that serves to inhibit further corrosion problems.
For these Navy divers, there is a strong awareness that over 1,000 of their colleagues lie just the other side of the steel plates. Behind the portholes, air is still trapped, and as a sign of respect, no one shall enter the ship.
At a point later in the project, we will be dropping the camera into these open hatchways to shoot some photographs. Of course, we consider Arizona a war grave, and we are being extremely careful about having a very, very good compass for straying even a short distance from the external features of the vessel. Now, at this point, having known essentially what is there, we're trying to determine what's going to happen to it over the next 50, 100, 1,000 years.
These black balls of oil, it is thought, will go on escaping at the current rate for decades to come. Across the other side of Pearl Harbor lies another monument to the attack of 1941. The USS Utah had been mistaken by the attacking planes as a carrier or flat top. In fact, she was a training ship with bulks of timber on her deck. Abandoned as worthless, no plan or survey of the wreck exists today.
Arizona, this is Utah. Go ahead, over.
Larry Murphy, like the rest of Lenihan's team, is wedded to the concept of preservation. He's been diving for 20 years and is to coordinate the process of measuring and mapping the vessel.
Okay, let me have a second tape.
You need a second tape? Okay.
It's a difficult job. In the murky water of the harbour, a diver can only see 6 feet of the 500-foot-long ship.
I'll take the board and we'll position one tape and measure from the other one. And I'll do the reporting.
The Utah, lying on her side, is in surprisingly good condition, although most of her top hamper has been cut away or salvaged. The process of mapping will include every detail of what's left. It's a highly specialized skill, requiring particularly close cooperation between national parks and Navy divers. As much as possible of the drawing is done on site and underwater. But for the illustrator, Jerry Livingston, there's months of detailed work before the final plans are completed.
What do you got? These ones you guys are working on?
Yeah.
Okay.
L8, B5, and G3. I got a lot of...
Only by having a greater knowledge of what exists underwater and the rate of deterioration can the object of this exercise be realized: the preservation of these vessels as historic monuments for succeeding generations.
Thanks for a hell of a surprise. It's 100 feet to that.
Yeah, we can go fairly close to the rocks there.
The Submerged Cultural Resources Unit are also responsible for underwater sites around the coasts of North America. Here, in Lake Superior, is an original answer to the problems of conservation of historic wrecks: the establishment of an underwater park. In the cold, fresh water of the lake, and mostly at a depth of over 100 feet, these wrecks are scattered around Isle Royal, close to the US border with Canada. The threat to the preservation of these wrecks has neither come from the elements that sank them, nor from commercial salvors, but from sport divers. Ships that now come to the island bring hundreds of holidaymakers. They come to walk, to camp, to canoe, and increasingly to dive. But the shipwrecks that attracted them are now, like the wildlife, protected. Since 1890, the Rock of Ages lighthouse on the west coast of the island has warned ships of impending fog. It was weather like this that caused many ships to wander off course, to fall prey to Isle Royal's treacherous reefs. Even huge steam-driven bulk freighters were not safe. The massive 500-foot-long Emperor and the Chester A. Congdon, fully laden with wheat. Wrecked and sunk, both vessels now lie in deep water. But mystery still surrounds Isle Royale's most spectacular and notorious wreck. The Kamloops disappeared in the winter of 1927. There were no survivors. Hidden for over 50 years, the Kamloops has now been found, but it lies in over 170 feet of water, beyond the limits of safe diving. The Park Service, to study the wreck, are using remote-controlled submersibles, supplied by the National Geographic Society. Unmanned and powered from the surface, these vehicles are capable of working at very great depths. With powerful self-contained lights, the vehicle finds the ship's propellers and sends back television pictures and takes photographs, fully controlled from the surface. Dan Lenihan's using it to do a complete photographic survey and perhaps discover the circumstances surrounding her loss.
Okay, Dan, we're just coming up right now out of the junk pile. Okay, now Pat wanted to look at chocks. You know, those lifeboat chocks. So here you go.
There you go.
Here's the other one. Pat, what does it tell you?
Well, it looks to me like the boat couldn't have been possibly launched intentionally. You know, those things are still fixed in place.
You say they got divers reports about 2 men down there?
Yes.
The depth and extreme cold, only just above freezing, makes it a very dangerous place for the unwary. 2 sport divers have already been lost on the wreck. The dangers of diving is one of the problems the Park Service now attempts to control, and all divers have to obtain permits.
Royal Diver, Royal Diver. This is National Park Service vessel Belle Isle calling Royal Diver.
Belle Isle, Royal Diver, Channel 68.
I'd like to come alongside and talk to you for a moment. Which side would you prefer, over? Do you guys have a buoy on the tug, if I figure it out?
Yeah, it's not much of one. It's just a mopar on a piece of string.
Yeah.
Good enough to find it, though.
Thanks. And you can give that to Bruce when you get in there.
All right. Well, I suppose I should get the dive flag.
Yeah. How many people are you putting in the water?
There'll be 4. Just 4.
Well, have a good dive, all.
Okay.
See you.
Isle Royale's rangers also have powers of arrest, seizure, and search. There are heavy penalties for souvenir hunters.
I make periodic checks on vessels diving in the park, checking to see that they do have a permit, and just finding out what they've been up to, where they've been, what kind of experiences that they've been having. That way they know that we're aware of what they're up to, and it's an opportunity to give them any assistance that they might need, or just be on the scene when there's diving activity going on.
By far the most popular of the island's wrecks is the America. She lies just below the surface, clearly visible from above. Built in 1898, she served as a package steamer on the lake. Laden with mail, she had just left Isle Royale on June the 6th, 1928, when she hit a reef. All 48 passengers and crew made it safely ashore as she began to sink. Her engine room flooded. Tourists came to have their pictures taken, but storms and ice soon tore away her superstructure, and the America settled below the surface. It is now possible to swim down into the heart of the ship. The National Park Ranger is Larry Murphy.
Descending the main stairway. Concrete floor. patterns made to look like flagstone. Broken balustrades, banisters.
The hazards are many as the diver descends deeper into the ship, dropping down deck by deck. The way on becomes dark and confined as the light from outside disappears.
Going to be descending down the second flight of stairs into the galley area.
There have been attempts in the past by commercial salvors to raise America, but the Park Service philosophy is now to keep these wrecks in situ and intact for the sport diver to explore.
Swimming along over the engine room. The engine looks as if it could be cleaned and almost started. I'm dropping down by the high pressure cylinder down to the lower recesses of the engine room. This is the electric panel, most of the switches have been removed. The ones that are still here still operate. Rheostat, switches. This would be totally unexpected in any other environment.
Little on display is now being stolen. Switches and portholes remain intact. An engineer's boot, discarded in the moment of panic as the engine room flooded. The America has in fact become a giant underwater museum, protected by a now firmly established underwater national park. The most spectacular and unspoilt underwater museum in the world lies in the middle of the Pacific. Coral gardens have grown up on the decks of cargo vessels that once supplied the Japanese naval base here at Truk Lagoon. Inside, the darkness and the quiet belie the violence that rained down on these ships over 40 years ago. Operation Hailstone began at dawn, February the 17th, 1944. 5 American aircraft carriers launched 72 Hellcat fighters, their mission to destroy enemy aircraft and assume control of the air at Truk Lagoon. In the first attack, some 250 Japanese planes were destroyed or shot down.
Yeah.
Through the jungle today, across what was once a runway, is what's left of the Japanese command post.
1 command post and 4 storage.
And this is all that's left now, is it?
And now there is 3 or 4 families within the command post.
These buildings took one direct hit after another, leaving empty halls, and the top story, which has collapsed. Just off the island, evidence of Japanese losses. A Zero fighter lies upside down, the aluminium skin resisting any coral growth. Landing gear with its tire still intact. A Mitsubishi twin-engined bomber shot down whilst trying to take off. The nose section took the brunt of the crash, but the rest is perfectly preserved. After the skies had been cleared, a fresh attack. This time the bomber's target was the supply fleet itself. Unlike Pearl Harbor, the Japanese naval base was never to recover. Exploding ordnance and aviation fuel marked the end of over 200,000 tons of shipping. One, the Ikoku Maru, exploded with such force that it also destroyed the attacking US plane. Wreckage from the raid is littered across the islands. No one can visit the unmarked wrecks in the lagoon without a local guide. Truckees' law, in trying to protect the sites, forbids unlicensed diving and the taking of any object from the ships. The local people are custodians of the wrecks. That's all the protection there is. But the lagoon, 45 miles across and up to 300 feet deep, can hide many ships. 20 or so have still never been found. Locating the wrecks depends entirely on experience and local knowledge. The guide navigates by lining up one island with another. There's no marker, no compass. The anchor lands slap on the deck of the Shinkoku Maru, an aircraft supply ship, 120 feet below. The truckees are happy to lead what few visitors they have down to the sites. But as the numbers swell, their ability to police will be seriously stretched. Below the grating is the ship's hold, and there, strewn across the bottom, lies the cargo. Brand new Zero fighters, the gauges still intact, planes that never flew. Ammunition and shells lie everywhere. At 160 feet, the limit of safe diving, are tanks lying on the deck. Inside the ship, it's dark and dangerous. Hanging wires, sharp edges. Although today many of the ship's crew have been removed by the Japanese for burial, a few still remain. Local divers have left a shrine nearby. Some of those who died were truckees. The ship's operating table, bottles and sterilizer at hand. Still further inside the wreck, sake bottles and dishes, portable artifacts on every surface, and lying in the silt across the floor. How long will these relics last? Can they be saved for others to see and learn? With more and more tourists, these sites are increasingly under threat. "1,500 miles north of Truk, the threat is already being met. The US National Park Service is now for the first time spreading its influence on an international scale. Here at Guam, a new park has been set up to protect the sites that saw some of the fiercest fighting in the Pacific.
The Americans' high-speed offensive in the Pacific engulfs the important island of Guam, first American territory captured by the Japanese. Liberation is coming, but first a hail of steel from the 5th United States Fleet.
On the 21st of July 1944, after 13 days of continual air and naval bombardment, some 55,000 US troops stormed the island of Guam. But as the Marines waded ashore from landing craft caught up on coral reefs, Japanese shoreline batteries sprang to life and cut them down. Every yard of the 32-mile-long island was hard fought. The Japanese sniping from caves and foxholes in the jungle, the Americans replying with grenades, and the effective but infamous flamethrower. The battle lasted for 3 weeks. The jungle has covered much that remains, but here, the new national park, like Isle Royale, is not just on the land, but underwater as well. Larry Murphy has been brought in by the government of Guam to consult on how this unique slice of World War history can best be preserved and managed.
I'm entering the bridge area. The ship must have been pretty spectacular when the first sport divers visited it.
120 feet down is the Tokai Maru, a Japanese passenger cargo vessel sunk in 1943.
It's virtually devoid of portable artifacts now. Going through the superstructure and over the hull.
In an extraordinary quirk of fate, lying alongside the Tokai and just touching her keel is another ship, the Cormoran, a German auxiliary cruiser sunk in 1917. A unique testimony to the two great wars.
The particular poignancy for these wrecks is that the hull of the Tokai Maru sunk in 1943, sitting very nearly touching the Cormoran. Swimming along the decks, portholes have been removed. In the distance, the 350-foot hull of Tokai is visible. It's a very moving, very poignant experience diving on these wrecks. And they're symbolic of a nation's essence and character, hopes, and as such, they're really war memorials.
そしたらですね、今度タンクあげますんで、自分の BC レギュレーター自分の席に持ってってください。わかりました？
As part of the new national park, the wrecks off Guam are the target of thousands of sport divers who holiday here from all parts of the world. 80% are from Japan.
それで、ヨシのグループがその次 B グループ。わかった？それで、やっぱ同じように降りてってください。それで、濁らさないようにしてね。それからまた浅い方に散り。OK。で、everybody and same time na come up.
This production line diving is actually helping to preserve the wrecks. Visitors are told, take nothing, only pictures, leave the site alone. It's a message to which Larry Murphy would like every diver to pay heed.
I think that the single most important outcome from all this activity that we're seeing in Guam is that we're going to leave a significant legacy for future generations. As each generation, these will become more and more historically important. And through these activities, our grandkids may be able to see these wrecks in much the same way that we saw them today, and also those of the Japanese and the Americans who are diving here as well. And I think it's very important, and that there was an international interest in how these wrecks are going to be managed, how they're going to be preserved, and that they belong to an international heritage.
Over the next few years, new historic sites will be discovered underwater in growing numbers in every corner of the globe. Not only the wrecks of two world wars, but Roman wrecks, Chinese junks, Spanish galleons. Will they be looted or saved for posterity? From the 20th century, with the passing of time, these sites will become increasingly precious to the people of the 21st.
This atmospheric music accompanying the series is available on a BBC album, cassette and CD.